Hello guys, this is a story of a siren, which comes from an ancient creature and refers to people who could use singing to entice, seduce, manipulate, and heal others. Aria is the main character of this story, who had been forced to live the life of a siren and had witnessed and experienced a great deal of horrifying things. Let's start this fantasy romance story. Aria, my angel, the Emperor said earnestly, come and save me salvation. The Emperor seeks salvation from the monster. How absurd! It was so funny that she could no longer laugh. Aria stared at him as he stretched out his hand towards her cage, but she didn't move. Please sing. Aria, if you don't sing I'll make sure you'll never be able to walk again, he fumed, threatening her into submission. His strength was quickly ebbing, his madness near. After tons of threats and persuasion that lead to nowhere, he finally resorted to begging. He was completely insane. Please sing for us, Siren, I beg for your mercy. Please, Siren, the dancers pleaded. Until just a few months ago these were the people who wouldn't hesitate to bring her misery. They laughed at her, and whispered behind her back, the musicians and conductors who played the song for the siren. Even the knights who guarded the Emperor, they called her a monster, but here they are now begging on their knees, waiting for Aria to open her mouth. Aria caught her breath as something lunged painfully up her neck. Cough, she spewed. It was blood. The pain throbbed in her chest, and the blood slumped all over her body. She looked at her hands, which was now coated in blood, the red fluid loosening her grip. With teary eyes she clutched her chest. Ah, so this is how I die. Aria smiled. At long last she can finally have her eternal rest. Her tightly closed lips opened, and she finally sang, "Come to me, sweet death." As Aria began to sing, the whole audience became silent. Nobody could take their eyes off her. She's been abusing her voice so it became rough and tired over time. Nonetheless, everyone was still mesmerized at her singing. Her voice rolled over the hills in sorrowful waves. It was raspy and quiet, yet so powerful as it was brought out in a fit of pain. Come and guide me into peace. The song, which started calmly, wrapped around them like a warm ray of sunshine. They echoed amongst the masonry and up to the rafters, then comforted and stroked them tenderly as if it were the voice of an angel. "Oh my lord," someone said as they shed tears. With a serene smile the melody purred to the soul, piercing through and touched their hearts from within. "I am tired of this world," Aria continued singing. This song she sang was a hymn about seeing heaven through death. However, due to Aria's dark tone it became a completely different song. It turned into a song to call upon the devil. Come the blessings, the irresistibly sweet sound that reverberated in the silence instantly clutched their hearts. Aria's songs were like poison, slowly devouring their entire being from within. Come, the murky voice grabbed their ankles and dragged them straight into the swamp. Into the swamp of the abyss, into the swamp of death, into the swamp of hell. The sound spread violently as Aria continued to sing at the top of her lungs. "I am waiting for you," she shouted. She begged to God who had abandoned her but ended up getting hurt, cursed, and left alone again. Eventually she lost hope in God. "Come and close my eyes. If there's no God, then," she sincerely prays, "that the devil will take her instead." Suddenly the Emperor let out a strangled scream as he felt overwhelming pain. He couldn't breathe. It was as if someone was strangling his neck, squeezing the life out of him. A second later, he lost strength in his feet, and he fell to the ground. The impact of the fall shuddered all the way through his body, which only made the pain 10 times worse. "Bless Sabbath, come," Aria sang as she let the last note of the song curl slowly from her lips. The song was over. The ritual was finally finished. Cough, the Emperor choked as he gasped for air. His hands were shaking and his whole body was soaked with cold sweat. Puzzled, the fallen Emperor slowly got back to his feet. What on earth is going on? When the Emperor looked around he realized that most of the audience had fainted. Turns out it wasn't just him that had to endure that unbearable pain. Some of the knights that regained consciousness drew out their swords, but their aim was negligent, and their feet staggered. The Emperor was appalled. If he had a sword in his hand he would have carelessly ended his own life because he couldn't withstand the pain. The dread creeps over him like an icy chill, numbing his brain. How dare this bitch? But when he came back to his senses that fear quickly turned into anger. How dare you try to kill me? Aria had little to no rights as she was the only siren remaining on the land. I saved you from the brink of death, and this is how you repay my kindness? He ranted. Sirens live for the purpose of singing, they are not allowed to do anything else. Today I will surely break your will to live. I shall punish you for disobeying me. He took one of the knight's sword and lunged towards her. Suddenly a black shadow cast over her. After living inside the cage her entire life, she finally gained freedom. She closed her eyes. Sweet death, blessed rest. It was then that the doors suddenly swung open. A man with black hair said, "What a sad song." He moved closer with those hollow eyes that stared so deeply into her own, and as Aria raised her head, their eyes met. The Grand Duke of Valentine, the man who sold his soul to the devil. The man who was not supposed to be here actually came. His red footprints stained the white marble floor as he approached her. He really came. Aria couldn't believe it. The Duke took out his sword, which was drenched in blood. The blood on his sword danced merrily as he drew a semicircle on the ground. "If you seek salvation from the devil, then now is the time." Beyond the wide-open door, the blood-stained imperial palace was as serene as a tomb, just like it was in the beginning. "You're welcome. The devil killed the emperor. The Sabbath has come," he said indifferently. Then he took the key out of the emperor's arms and unlocked Aria's cage. The cage slowly opened. Standing underneath the chandelier, the devil shone brilliantly. His eyes, which looked like burned ashes, glistened underneath the lights, and when they reflected it, they made tiny stars. In this dark night, his eyes are like the moon, scattering the nascent rays, ever illuminating her soul. How stunning! For the first time in Aria's life, she was mesmerized by a person's eyes. "The birdcage is open. Fly anywhere you wish to go." It was a memory that she would never forget even after her death. Aria looked at her shackled ankles with a blank face. Then she raised her head. The Grand Duke of Valentine, a traitor who killed the emperor, yet he was her savior. Her cage was wide open as the Grand Duke said if she had wings she'd gladly fly away. "But I can't fly anywhere," Aria said as she laughed and wiped her bitter tears. "Her death was near, put an end to my life." As Aria was about to open her mouth to make her last will, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her vocal cords. She bent over as drops of blood splattered on her lap, and eased by slow, torturous degrees. The coughs eased in intensity, and then slowly passed. She glanced at the violent red that stained all over her body before her eyes went blank. "You are a bird with a broken wing." The Grand Duke's languid gaze briefly touched her twisted leg. "Siren, I've heard that listening to your songs drives people crazy." Aria collapsed, her body slowly becoming weak. The Grand Duke held her dying body in his arms and said, "Then I guess your song won't affect me. Because I've always been crazy. If there is a limit to madness, you must prove it yourself." The devil smiled and carried her body, having no strength left in her frail body. Aria finally closed her eyes in the devil's arms. "Aria, you must never speak." "All right." Aria's mother Sophia had been feeding her potions ever since she was born. After drinking the potion, Aria was not able to say anything. She became mute. She couldn't even cough. "You're a pathetic failure who should have never been born." Aria's expression sank. Why did she have to be beaten and cursed by her own father? His facial expression was one of absolute disdain. He abhorred her. To him, she was nothing but a burden on his shoulders. "I can speak. I have a name too." She blamed her mother. The mother who would never visit unless it was to deliver potions. The mother who would scold her when she didn't drink the potions. The mother who had never read her fairy tales or sung her a lullaby. The mother who had never even embraced her. Does she even love me? Aria knew nothing. She could only watch her as the days went by. When she turned 10 that spring, she learned everything. Sophia had passed away. Her vocal cords were completely torn. She took her own life. It was said that she committed a violent crime. She knew of the truth only after she overheard the maid's conversations. Sophia tried to protect her from Count Cortez. "I was a siren." Siren, named after an ancient creature. It was an ability that ran through Sophia's veins, the ability to charm, lure, control, and heal others by singing. Sirens were mythological creatures that only existed in legends. However, 12 years ago Count Cortez found out that they truly existed. So he kidnapped a siren and introduced her to the world. That siren was Aria's mother. "Is that how I was born?" Her whole body trembled. The news pained her, but it was incomparable to Count Cortez's domestic violence towards Aria. "How dare you run away from me, you bitch! I won't be your nanny." It hurt a lot. That day was the worst day of her life. Aria sat there, tears pricking her eyes, pale hands trembling with fear and sadness. She tried to block out the screams, but it was impossible. The noise kept ripping her heart. She felt more pain than the human body could bear, and she genuinely believed she would die. "I have to run away." She had thought of escaping before, but she was only 10 years old. Furthermore, it had only been a while since she discovered her mother's true intentions, which were to protect her. Suddenly Aria let out a scream. She wailed because she couldn't endure the pain any longer. Haha, yes, there's no way that a siren's daughter can't speak. How dare you try to deceive me? No, stop it. How beautiful, like the voice of an angel, as clear and as soft as a feather. In the end, Aria ended up following her mother's footsteps, living the life of a siren. The powerful nobles begged her to sing, offering her all of their wealth and shamelessly kissing her feet. The secret social parties of the imperial family and aristocrats turned into a gathering to listen to the songs of the siren. They did terrible things. She saw many things she shouldn't have seen. She heard things she shouldn't have heard. I didn't want to know any of this. She prayed to God every day, please save me, but God never responded. Due to her overwhelming talent, the siren's songs became even more popular. The people worshipped her as if she were a deity. They begged her to save them until the worst comes to the worst. Rumors began to spread throughout the empire. The siren was rumored to be a monster, not an angel of salvation who borrowed the voice of a god. The legendary monster deceived all of you, Saintess Veronica said with teary eyes in front of the believers. I also got addicted to her songs, and most of the palace officials went crazy. The emperor too. Her tears seemed so real that the congregation in the square became agitated. The nobles went crazy. The emperor became a tyrant. The empire fell to ruin, and it's all the siren's fault. The siren was a fake. Not a sacred being, but a horrible monster. The real one was Veronica, the saintess from the Holy Empire. They shouted in anger, the imperial family is over because of the monster. We must clean up the imperial palace that has become a den of heathens. Be in power, O holy being. This is not just treason, it's blasphemy. The sirens declaring a holy war. The benevolent saint shook her slender shoulders slightly. War was inevitable. She raised her head as if she had made a decision. Their eyes rest upon golden arcing rays that fell behind Veronica's fluttering blonde hair. I will save all of you, Veronica pledged. Wow, I will purify the palace and grant God's grace so that no more innocent sacrifices will be made. Saintess Veronica, the protagonist of a perfectly woven heroic narrative, and Aria, the villain who ruined the empire, the root of all evil. I drove them to madness. Really, even Aria herself was confused. The imperial family, the aristocrats, the commoners, they all said that it was her fault. The war had begun. Men and women of all ages were mobilized for war. They were dragged unconditionally. Unable to refuse the conscription, from the street outside came a peculiar blood-chilling sound. It was like the low snarling of many voices, and it grew louder and louder until it became a sullen muttering roar. The knights called the scene a purification process. Execute the monster. When the public sentiment arose, the emperor hid Aria in the depths of the palace. Execution? No, you have to sing like a bird for your entire life. Then he broke her leg, covered her mouth, and held her captive inside a small birdcage. How long have I been here? Aria burst into tears. This is how she dies. She gazed upon her bloody palms and clenched her fist. Yes, I'll just die. Once the last remaining siren dies, no one will have to suffer like her. Aria gave up everything. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop her emotions from coming out of her rotten heart. Do you want me to kill you? Aria shifted her gaze to the source of the voice, Lord Cardenis Valentine, the devilish Grand Duke who was said to have murdered all of his relatives and cut off their limbs at the age of 18. Here he was staring at a woman with a broken leg trapped inside the Emperor's cage and dying because you called for me. I called for you. The devil, the Grand Duke of Valentine, a despicable tyrant like the Emperor, but he was also a murderer, and he worshipped the devil. Rumors said that he sold his blood-stained soul to the devil. Call me when you need me. Your songs can be heard everywhere. It was as if the devil had offered her a contract with her soul as collateral. He'll kill us all. Aria was dying anyway. What else would she rather do than revenge? A bird with a broken wing will not be able to fly again even if its cage was open, but at the brink of her death Aria chose to come. Sweet death, call upon the devil. The Grand Duke who barged into the palace murdered all those who stood in his way. With a single sword, everyone, last one of them all except for Aria. The screams tore through the room like a great shard of glass. They were the kind of strangled cry that belonged to those not long for this world. Every face was stained with red splatter, and limbs lay at unnatural angles underneath the light of the chandelier. The night was filled with terror. Aria was the only one who saw the light of salvation behind the Grand Duke's back. Too bad. Could I have listened to your song one more time if I had come a little earlier? I wanted to hear you singing. She answered slowly. Has my song corrupted you too? No, I corrupted you. He picked up the finest herb leaves that had been scattered nearby in a languid manner. Then he stuffed it into a smoking pipe and bit it in his mouth. "Let's go to hell together," he said as he pressed the pipe to his red lips and puffed out a cloud of smoke. "I apologize if you hadn't called me in. You could have gone to heaven." Hell. The scene in front of her looked like hell. The imperial families and nobles on the floor were lifeless. Their bodies were scattered in multiple places, stained with dried blood crimson, and the room was filled with a nasty butcher shop odor. Furthermore, the emperor died. God asked us to forgive our enemies. Sacrifice yourself for others. Deny yourself, God. But even on the verge of death, the vengeance of a devil was far too sweet. If the price of her revenge was hell, then she was willing to pay for her sins. Sing. I want to sing. For the first time in her life, Aria wanted to sing on her own volition. Listen to me. Her voice didn't come out well, and she could barely open her lips, but the Grand Duke was still willing to listen. The devil who took me to hell, her savior. He held her in his arms. The pain that weighed on her heart slowly died down. All of her senses gradually escaped from her body as she began to fall into a deep sleep, and a faint smile hung around her face. As she blinked her last second, Aria had passed on. But as the numbness of sleep slowly faded from her limbs, a floral scent, she smelled the scent of spring. Is this hell? Her eyes opened, her eyelashes faintly batting against her lids when she blinked, and she gasped in a breath. A familiar ceiling covered her vision. It was the attic ceiling that she had been locked up in until she was 10. She pondered for a while, her breathing beginning to steady. How odd, she thought. There was no sharp pain in her chest anymore. It had pained her a lot when she breathed. It doesn't hurt anymore. She touched her face. No burn marks. Why can't I feel them? She sat up, dragged her feet off the bed, and cast her eyes around her surroundings. The cage is gone. She wasn't locked up, she was free. She could move her whole body freely. Her legs weren't crippled, her wounds were gone. And she could actually speak. It's not a dream. Her limbs hadn't been without pain these past few years, yet here she was. Her body was perfect, younger and healthy. Aria jumped to her feet and ran towards a small window. The petals which heralded the end of winter fluttered its spring. The spring greeted her as butterfly wings greeted the air. The sky was blue, the flowers bloomed, and the sun brought a welcoming warmth that coated her pink calamine hair. It was a beautiful landscape, something she thought she would never see again. Aria reached outside the window and grabbed the petals that scattered through the air, holding them in her hands as if she were praying. She was resurrected. The devil has given her another opportunity. I can talk. She didn't drink the potion because her mother had died. The fact that she still lived in the attic meant that her father had not heard her voice. Father Count Cortez, the one who ruined my life. She sought revenge then, and she will do so now. Her revenge was all that would make her whole again. The first thing that popped into her mind was not the surprise of turning back in time or the confusion regarding her unusual surroundings. Rather, it was the 7 letters of revenge. He must be drinking by now. He should have been drinking in that place since morning. Aria wanted to visit her father. So she opened the door of the attic without hesitation and immediately headed underground. Goodness, you scared me. What? How the maids were dumbfounded at the sight of her leaving the attic. Aria brushed past them carelessly. She will soon meet her so-called father in the wine cellar. What are you? Count Cortez was too drunk to fully grasp the situation. He was confused about Aria's sudden appearance, and he held a wry expression, but when Aria began to sing, his face brightened and he was soon bathed in astonishment. The song that I heard in my sleep, the dreamlike melody which seemed to be repressed in water, soon echoed throughout the room. I opened my eyes, awake from the scattered dreams. Aria's singing guided the Count to the river of oblivion. Her voice sounded like an ingenious fairy, a playful yet tangy tone. He could hear the slender strings of a violin being plucked from somewhere far away. Gone the mysterious night. At that moment the song succeeded in capturing the Count's deranged heart. This was the song of the siren. This is ridiculous, he said, astonished. No, it can't be. How in the world are you able to? Don't tell me that, Sophia, the Count proclaimed in disbelief. It was beautiful and angelic, something he never thought he'd yearn in his entire lifetime. That's not all. The lyrics swam through his head like a wakeful dream, the notes soothing him, siphoning his entire being from within, but at the same time there was anger laced in her words and a bloody smell filled the entire room. This intensity was something he could not overcome. It seized and locked him in, just like an incurable poison disguised as an angel's touch, ready to lead him to his morbid death. He could feel it subconsciously. They are both sirens, yet the discrepancy. That song would make sane people deranged. A small voice, yet something that could bring the whole aristocrat under her feet, perhaps taking control of the empire, was not an exaggeration. "Let me hear once more," the Count begged before stepping on a bottle of liquor, and fell to the floor. His bloodshot eyes set rigid on the siren as he outstretched his hand trying to grip his figment of desire. It was hideous. Aria shifted her gaze upon his body and stared at him, her eyes filled with disgust. To think that I was sacrificed for someone as pathetic as him. To satisfy the greed of those who know nothing but wealth and power. How stupid I was. Count Cortez, he controlled his daughter who knew nothing with violence, compelling her into his bidding, things beyond imagination. The violence he brought to her still fresh in her memory. New bruises appeared on her body every night as they caused agony that could only be seen on the inside. She was terrified of him, but not any more. "My voice shall be the last thing you hear tonight." Aria's cold words cleared part of the irrational haze in his mind. "Wait, this song is—" "Yes, you know this song well. It was the first song that he told her, a song to deal with nobles who know things they shouldn't know. You'll forget everything. No, what are you doing?" The siren didn't address his superficial outcry. Her symphonious voice sprang to life once more, not carrying even a hint of sympathy. The song was like a mirage. The night disappeared as if it was nothing but an illusion. A part of him faded like a trace of snow in the first of summer. Every single part of the memory residing in him was torn down. A haze gradually veiled his whole body, and his memory vanished without a trace. Everything was a dream. No, not a dream. The siren whom I'd been longing for is standing before me. The Count desperately shut his ears and shook his head, as if by doing so, could retain a portion of his memory. That voice, nothing could ever compare its worth. With that in his hands, neither honor, power, glory, or wealth could satisfy his greed, yet his lifetime longing condemned his effort as she sang the final verse, concluding the ending by herself without him in it. Everything was just a dream. He was reeling under overwhelming force as the bloody metallic taste passed through his throat. "Siren," he shouted as he coughed out blood. His eyes were dull as his determined gaze finally faltered. He screamed his final plea as her voice squeezed away all his remaining strength. The song was over. The desolate cry of the Count finally stopped, and Aria found no reason to hear his regrets anymore. It made no difference for her, as she wasn't even going to give him a chance to ask for forgiveness. Looking at the senseless Count, Aria asked coldly, "Where are the mermaid's tears?" "Mermaid's tears? It's inside the drawer of my bedside table, in a jewelry box." "Where's the key?" He rummaged through his pockets, his bleary eyes filled with bewilderment. A clinking sound chimed before the key emerged from one of the Count's pockets. Aria ripped the key away from his hand and ran straight into the Count's bedroom. She turned the key and found a jewelry box inside the drawer. She carefully opened the small case. Underneath the box was a pearl earring. Its rainbow-colored luster glowed underneath Aria's shadow. Found it, the mermaid's tears. She never dared to resist her father because of the pair earrings he had, or better known as the tears of a mermaid. The mermaid's tears were able to fend off the influence of the siren's voice. It's like a shield that would protect the wearer even from the malicious voice of the ill-willed siren. The bearer of this earring was someone even a siren could never harm. I was able to flee from my father just after my mother died. Ironically, the Count used to carry the mermaid's tears wherever he went, but after Sophia died, he left the earrings untouched inside his drawer. He began to wear it again ever since Aria's identity as a siren was revealed. Mother Aria swept the jewelry box with her fingers and clicked open the case. "If only I had come back a few days earlier." Aria shook her head. She was fortunate enough to return at the right time. Had she returned even a little late, she would not have been able to break out of the Count's grasp as smoothly as she did then. As much as she missed her mother and her presence, it was important not to be greedy, lest she would wind up losing this fortuitous opportunity. Aria sealed the jewelry case shut and clutched the earrings tight within her hold. She really came back. Back to when she was a measly 10-year-old. Aria put her hand on her pounding heart. "I thought I'd be in hell," she denied God, yet instead of being punished she was given another chance. A new life to rebrand those years of foul memories. It was ridiculous. Now there would be no burn marks deforming her skin, nor two slender yet broken legs. I can change the future. Aria felt unshackled, for she had been given the freedom she craved for a lifetime. Nothing will chain her ever again, not the Count, the repugnant aristocrats, and certainly not the Emperor. The seed of her childhood nightmares which reigned her entire life was finally gone. What do I do now? Her mind agonized upon her worrisome future. Unfortunately, the potion she had taken had consequences of its own. Apart from losing her vocal cords, the potion also shortened her lifespan. The potion gave Aria's freedom a time limit. It was something she couldn't change even if she had traveled back in time. I'll die when I reach 20. With this limited time, how can I spend the rest of my life meaningfully? Only one thing is for sure: she should never let anyone know that she's the only remaining siren. My songs will drive people insane. The siren's enchanting music fascinates yet poisons people's minds at the same time. Their voice could lure them to insanity and corrupt their thoughts. Aria was fed up with such situations. Suddenly she recalled a peculiar individual who held her on the brink of her death. Siren, I've heard that listening to your songs drives people crazy. It was then I guess I won't mind because I've always been crazy. She recalled the voice in her last moments. His gray eyes blurred as if they had lost their original color, and would only brighten when he slaughtered the nobles. His eyes were soulless and lifeless, gaze wandering everywhere as if searching for clarity. Perhaps he desired sanity, although he could not stand it. Perhaps being sane tormented his mind. Perhaps that was why he could not take himself off the high wishful dream that gradually faded as he came into contact with brutal reality. Cardenis Valentine. He was only at the age of 18 when he inherited the title of the Grand Duke. However, 4 years later a dreadful accident occurred. The Valentines were brutally annihilated. The entire bloodline and even their subordinates, they were all killed, hence it was named the Valentine Incident. Valentine was the only survivor of the tragedy. Naturally, he was referred to as the criminal, although no punishment was executed. The incident was said to be the culmination of the devil's madness, which was passed on to the Valentines. Generations after generations, even the emperor overlooked the incident. Simply put, the affairs of the Valentines were inviolable. That might be true indeed. He could have been involved with the devil and killed all his parents, relatives and subordinates. After seeing him slaughter the aristocrats without batting an eye, even a dim-witted person would doubt him. But he didn't want anything. Every single person who signed a contract with the devil had their own desires. It might be gold, glory or honor, but it was surely something they desired so greatly, something that they would offer anything to obtain. Even by trading with the devil, but not him. His eyes weren't even burning with anger and vengeance like what was present in Aria. There was no passion nor zealousness. His eyes were just empty. His vacant eyes did not desire anything, yet he didn't hesitate to help her get her revenge. He offered her a choice. Just like a devil, it didn't occur to her that he could be the one that caused the Valentines' massacre. A man who doesn't want anything. Aria gave him the benefit of the doubt because he had given her hope. I will give you happiness. If he accepts her, can I spend the rest of my short life next to you? Aria thought she wanted to be the firefly that illuminated his darkest night. Give her entire life for him, a desire to protect him and a willingness to take on suffering if it was for his happiness. The maids are insane. The wooden flooring in the attic creaked under the maid's heavy footsteps. Aria sat on the bed, her eyes set to the window before retracting her gaze back to the maids. The maids put her breakfast on the discolored yellow quilt. On the tray was a watery yellow congee with an odd stench that wafted throughout the room. This is porridge. The Count told us to wash and dress her. Why does the Count suddenly care about her? I don't know. They could not help but sneer at the sight of the young girl. Their eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. Aria was the outcast of the mansion. Every person knew she was the victim of the Count's abuse. Yet none held her in favor, hence they regarded her as a ghost. They stood there doing nothing but staring at her with their arrogant eyes. Perhaps the Count is planning to acknowledge her as his child? No way. Right, he even declared that he wouldn't register her as a family even after he died. Is it because he's drunk? Ever since her mother passed away he would only drink throughout the day. Isn't he trying to replace her? Perhaps he's trying to substitute her mother like an ornamental doll. Aria had all of the distinctive traits of the siren's bloodline. Her hair that flowed softly down to her waist resembling cherry blossoms in mid-spring. Her pupils twinkled as though it was a polished pink sapphire, and a rosy color stained her cheek with a reddish hue. Her appearance contained a lovely aspect that no one can deny. The child's charming features shone even brighter than a gleeful spring. With such ethereal impression, someone might mistake her as a spring fairy. Siren people would speak of their diverse beliefs about the legendary creature, but they would always agree about one thing: their stunning appearances. The siren sings so sweetly that she lulls everyone into her song. With her voice she enchants. With her beauty she deprives of reason, voice, and sight alike deal destruction and death that used to be an unfounded legend. But when Sophia, Aria's mother, first appeared, the world had no choice but to accept their existence, the existence of a beautiful monster siren. Look at her eyes, they're like jewels trapping people with its enchanting gaze. One of the maids sat on the bed and stared at the child. Her mind was muddled before she soon came to her senses, and said, "What am I saying? She can't even speak." The approaching footsteps echoed sharply throughout the halls, growing louder every second. After a while the attic door slammed open, revealing a maid. Everyone's eyes darted towards her. Panting, the maid spoke. "The Lord has just sent Sally to the capital to pick up a new dress for the young miss. You're just in time. We were actually discussing that. He's sending her to the Grand Duke of Valentine." The chatter stopped, and a heavy silence settled over them. Everyone was speechless. "Will be at the expense of the Grand Duke." The maids shifted their gaze towards Aria. Everyone was pale, afraid to imagine what the Grand Duke might do once he finds out about Aria's mistreatment within the mansion. Unexpectedly, some of the maids sympathized with her. They pitied her because she had been abused all her life. "The Grand Duke hasn't sent an official letter of marriage, though," one of the maids pointed out, trying to reassure the others. Needless to say, her efforts were futile due to inheritance and family alliance. Marriages were contracted at a young age in most noble houses, hence the average age of engagement was rarely over 14. The Grand Duke of Valentine would turn 14 years old this year. "Well, she's going to die anyway." "That's right, she'll be sacrificed to the devil before he harms us." The House of Valentine usually searched for marriage partners only once in a generation. Then, the wife would have to bear the child of the Grand Duke and continue his bloodline. The child of the following marriage would get to inherit his succession rights, titles, precedence, and entailed property, but it wasn't as good as it sounds. The Grand Duchess usually dies after giving birth to an heir. There had been many rumors about it, but no one knew the actual truth. Those that became the Grand Duke's bride had to break all ties with their family and friends. They were nothing but sacrifices. That was what everyone called them. "You can't speak, and soon you'll be stuck in the Grand Duke's mansion forever. You have nothing to fear, though I'm sure you've suffered much worse." While listening to the maids, Aria recalled her memory of last night. After she got hold of the mermaid's tears entrancing the Count became quite simple. All she did was add a few words to the lyrics, "Send me to the Grand Duke of Valentine," and it immediately worked. "Shall I sing to them like what I did to my father?" No, there was no need for that. The maids kept repeating, "You need not be afraid," but Aria did not respond. There was an uneasy tension in the atmosphere. The maid's unsettled eyes glanced unceremoniously around the room. Then Aria rummaged through a small old silver bag that she had been carrying on her shoulder. She was mute, so she carried the bag every day as it contained items that helped her communicate. Inside the bag was a bottle of ink, a quill, and a pack of cards. Aria wrote on a card and held it out to the maids. The maids let out a gasp. They couldn't believe their eyes. "She's ordering us." Aria stared at them, her expression as empty as a blank sheet of paper. Then she kicked the bowl of soup beside her feet and spilled its contents all over the floor. Aria gazed at the maid who nervously served her tea. She asked for edible food but was given afternoon tea instead. The maid laid flamboyant desserts on the table. "I don't even know what these are called." The sweet aroma wafted through the air. But Aria hated it. These types of lavish foods were common for aristocrats, but not for Aria. How long had it been since she was treated as a human being, not as a bird in a cage? Aria beckoned for them to leave after sipping her tea. "If the young miss needs anything, please don't hesitate to call us." Not in their life. She would never give them the chance to make up for it. Aria glared at them, her sight blurred with fury, as she remembered the maids who had deftly abused her. It was the kind of glare that harbored malicious intent. "I will get my revenge someday." Aria shifted her eyes downward, thick pink lashes brushing the apples of her high cheeks. She gave them a smile that seemed sweeter than the delicacies laid on the table. The maids were astonished by the scene before them. Then she opened her pink lips and mouthed, "Get out!" The maids who read Aria's lips were startled and hurriedly left the attic in panic. After a while the sound of footsteps completely disappeared. I'm sure their whole bodies stiffened when they saw my sarcastic smile. How exciting! Aria touched her cheek once more, her smooth skin which was no longer scarred. When Aria was a siren, Count Cortez would always tell her about nobles. The aristocrats within the capital were demanding and loathed the sight of anything ugly. Since Aria had a burn mark that covered half of her face, she was labeled as ugly, hence why the Count forced her to wear a mask. However, she did not need one now, as she didn't have the burn marks anymore. Still, I should cover my face again. The expression of disgust, Aria knew the look. It was the look that the nobles made when she accidentally stripped off her mask. When they saw her face, their insides would curdle like milk with lemon. The sight of her made them sick from the ends of their hair to the nails on their toes. She did not need the mask. However, Aria's daily routine consisted of her wearing a mask, so she planned to do it again. "Are we on the right path?" Count Cortez growled, irritated by the rattling sound of the carriage wheels. The coachman replied with a quivering voice, "I'm not sure, my lord. We've been following the path, but I can't even see the entrance of the mountain. If you don't know, then who on earth will?" he shouted. Finally losing his temper, "Stop the carriage this instant," he raged. It was definitely morning when they left the mansion, but now the sun was already setting. Aria and the Count had been riding inside the carriage for days without rest. They were utterly exhausted. "Damn it all," he yelled, gritting his teeth, "that devil bastard! I swear one day I'm gonna..." The Duchy of Valentine was an unknown land. Tucked away amongst the Ingle Mountains and forests, the land was cut off from the outside world. Foreigners were strictly prohibited from entering. Furthermore, the territory had tight security. They would check everyone thoroughly before letting anyone in. Even when engaging in large and small diplomatic activities or dealings with merchant guilds, the Valentine family had always censored their opponents with great strictness. Understandably, they ignored the Count's offer to meet. There wasn't even a single reply. Aria mused. The Cortez family was famous for its lineage of musicians. Amongst them was Maestro Lo Cortez. He was famous for his overwhelming talents in singing, songwriting, and composing. He was known as the father of music and was considered to be the most outstanding musician of all time. Even Cortez, the maestro of music, was disregarded by the Valentines. Thanks to this, the Count snapped. His rage exploded like magma. He immediately hired a guide from the guild, scheming to break into the Grand Duke's mansion. "It is better to go back, my lord," the guide calmly remarked. He assured the Count that he was the best in the industry. But Aria was petrified. She felt a chill down her spine. "Your request was ridiculous from the very start. Nobody dares to visit the Grand Duke's mansion. Those that enter the Ingle Mountains have never come back alive." The Count had given him a large sum of money, yet he told him to go back. Anger boiled deep in his system, and he was ready to kill the guide. "You were the ones who accepted my commission. If you dare not take responsibility, you must pay with your life." Count Cortez threw open the carriage doors and drew his sword, ready to cut his neck. "If I'm killed, you two will be chased down by the guild. Then we'll both go down to hell." Count Cortez snarled, the sword cutting deeper into his neck. Gasped. The two of them continued to bicker. Meanwhile, Aria's gaze was elsewhere. She leaned out of the carriage and stretched her arms out the window. Suddenly she felt a tingling sensation. Is this a barrier? The source of the Siren's power is enchantments. The Siren's enchantments, the mage's mana, the priest's divine power, the shaman's spiritual power. Each power has its own differences, but the energy's essence was more or less the same. The barrier blocked the entrance of Ingle Mountain. Is this perhaps an illusion? The barrier prevented them from entering the mountain by creating an illusion. It seemed as if they walked in a straight path, but in truth they were constantly circling around the same place. Some intruders weren't able to cope with the situation, so they ended up killing themselves as expected. This wasn't easy. Then the sun was gone, and the night time came. The paths that were illuminated just hours before became lost in the blackness. As the forest fell into darkness, Aria heard the cries of beasts, rumbles. There was a shock and vibration as the ground trembled. What in tarnation! The knights of the House of Cortez unsheathed their swords, their skin clammy with nervous sweat. "That's why I told you to go back," the guide wailed. "Goodness gracious, what are we gonna do if the rumor about the monster is true?" "Monster, the deformed beast many times larger than the common predator." Why are you telling me that now?" "Because you kept shouting at me. You didn't even stop to listen," he accused. Aria had also heard of the rumor. The reason why so many people thought of the Valentines as devil worshippers were because of the rumor. "It's the devil's curse," someone muttered. Suddenly a scream broke out. "Arg, help!" The sound echoed throughout the forest, desperate and terrified. It was a cry of hysteria and disbelief bordering fear. The scream was one of the guard's last words before he perished. Aria fixedly stared at the knights surrounding her, and didn't look away for even a second. Yet by the time she blinked, another knight fell to the ground, his corpse soaked in a pool of blood. My eyes can't keep up, but I know there's something here. A moment later everyone was dead, the knights, mercenaries, guides, and even the coachman. The life that had once dwelt within them was nowhere to be found. It was a brutal slaughter. The ground was covered with soulless bodies lying limply. Aria lifted her head from the ground. In the midst of the bloody corpses stood a man wearing a black cloak. How entertaining! He smirked. His voice was deep like a low roll of thunder. How did the house of Valentine fall to such a state? The social hierarchy is nothing but a joke. A massacre had just happened before Aria's eyes, but she felt no remorse. Her tragic past had diminished her emotions. This method of slaughter beside the man were two large creatures that seemed to be the monsters that the guide talked about. It's been a while since the dogs ate. The man called the beasts dogs. The creature was huge and grotesque with black matted hair. They looked like wolves that were 3 times bigger than the regular size. Then Aria locked eyes with the man. Gray eyes. The man came up to her passing the pile of corpses and pointed his sword at her. His lips parted. Kill her. Aria's brain had shut down. The beasts ran towards her, and her knees gave away as she fell to the cold, hard ground. She shut her eyes waiting for them to deliver the last finishing blow, but there was no pain at all. Aria opened her eyes, tears blurring her vision. The monster licked Aria's hand and wagged its tail like a dog. The man glanced over the corners of his lips, fighting a smile, and his eyebrows slightly raised. Suddenly he broke into a fit of laughter. He was amused at the scene. After seeing Aria collapse, the beasts lowered their bodies and laid on the ground. They stared at her with puppy dog eyes, asking to be stroked. I'm saved, Aria thought, grasping her beating heart. Not far away, Count Cortez had fainted with foam in his mouth. Are you insane? What are you guys doing? He snarled, scowling at the beast's absurd acts. The beast immediately hid behind Aria's back. How amusing, he leered. The man approached Aria. Aria stared at his feet, which left bloody footprints onto the overused dirt path. His steps grew closer to her every second, and once he stopped, Aria lifted her head towards his. The man was tall, too tall. Who the hell are you? He glowered. Initially his eyes resembled a dead fish's, empty and dull. His facial muscles were just as loose. There was no anger, no sadness, no joy, nor resentment. He simply seemed bored. But now his eyes expressed sentiment. Instantly emotions flashed through his elaborate marble-like eyes, brimming with astonishment. He stared at her, wondering how someone so dainty could tame his hounds so easily. He was clearly interested in her. You're wearing a strange mask. He thoughtfully gazed at the large mask covering her face. The mask was a relic left by Aria's mother. My hounds respond instinctively to strong magic. These dogs obey me because no one else could oppose my power. Could you be stronger than me? Impossible. The man was overwhelmingly powerful. He was far stronger than her. No matter how talented Aria is, she was nothing but a mere 10-year-old who had never been trained. You look weak, like an insect. The man observed Aria from top to bottom. Sirens are the friends of animals. Being able to interact with them was one of their unique quirks. To think that this ability could save me from the monsters of the Ingo Mountains. Aria glimpsed at the beasts. They had transformed from ferocious-looking wolves to gentle sheeps. They licked her mask, acting vulnerable and cute, making it hard for Aria to come to her senses. Her mask was now dripping with saliva. Truthfully, Aria had never used her ability to communicate with animals. This was because she had never encountered them, or to be exact, she wasn't allowed to. She still remembered the horrific incident. Count Cortez always kept her under surveillance and watched her every move. If an animal approached her, he would not hesitate to level his crossbow and shoot them to death. Did you call that animal you want its help? He mocked. How ridiculous. Don't even think of running away from me. He picked up his crossbow and fired a bolt. The bolt struck the animal and blood splattered on Aria's face. The animal whimpered, its body gradually losing warmth. Blood pooled around it, tinting its white stomach crimson. It vacantly stared at her, eyes slowly losing its luster. Aria paled as the odor of death rose in the air like invisible smoke. The animal was as cold as the ground it laid on. It was now dead. Ever since then, Aria had vowed to avoid animals so that such miserable things would never happen again. She had never considered interacting with animals again, but the hounds before her looked strong. Their skin was thick and sturdy. A bolt would probably feel like a prick of toothpick to them. How cute! One of the hounds looked up at her with its big round eyes, its soft furry ears flopping over as it tilted its head. She hesitated for a moment, but soon gave in to the cuteness and patted him gently. Then the other hound rolled over, displaying its tummy and asking for a belly rub so adorable she stroked its belly. The beasts looked similar to wolves, but Aria had finally realized why they were called dogs. Their fur felt like silk against her skin and glistened in the moonlight, reflecting it like a pure black mirror. Aria could not resist petting them. The man clicked his tongue. You might as well get buried in the fur. He could no longer see Aria. The beasts' bodies were so large that their massive fur covered Aria's tiny self. You better tell me who you are once you get inside. The man grabbed her by the back of her neck and lifted her up. Your lordship is very courageous, commented an old man with slick gray hair. His name was William and he was the Valentine's butler. You are the first people to enter the Valentine mansion. He placed a mug on the table. Your lordship is very lucky too. Your life was saved thanks to the little lady, he said to the Count. Aria leaned towards the mug and peeked at its contents. The sweet fragrance of chocolate lingered throughout the room, but it was not hot chocolate. She wrapped her hands around the ceramic mug, letting the warmth flow through her fingers. What is this? She swirled the mug, and the brown liquid circled around. It looked just like hot chocolate too, but it was also condensed. Then she poked her finger inside. Squish soft. Is this marshmallow? Then the butler whispered something to her in a very small voice. Drink melon. It tastes like melon. Is that what he said? As Aria stared at the mug, the man wearing a black cloak finally opened his mouth. I need to go to the hunting grounds, he said while casually leaning against the wall. Right now? The butler questioned. I need to feed the hounds before the mountain animals eat all their prey. Count Cortez's head was a mess. He couldn't grasp the situation. Finally he raised his head and asked, where in blue blazes are we? Then the Count shouted his words. Our family's personal knights and mercenaries became dog food. He glared at Aria, redirecting his anger toward her. The hounds lying beside Aria got angry and threatened him. Frightened, the Count averted his gaze and lowered his head. I shall repeat my words. Your lordship was only able to survive because of Miss Aria here, the butler added. A moment later the man spoke. I will compensate you. Do you have any other complaints? Count Cortez was speechless, but the amount. The butler nervously turned towards the man. Give him as much as he pleases, he replied, annoyed. Count Cortez bit his lips. It was a good deal, but unfortunately, he had come for something else. Actually, I came here because I wanted to introduce my daughter to your son, he stammered. The Count was afraid of him after witnessing such brutal slaughter. He thought that the man was no different from a monster. He anxiously glanced at Aria, gesturing for her to take off the mask. But Aria did not move. The Count gave an awkward smile and quickly glazed it over. She will show you her appearance later. I assure you that she is my real daughter. Then why have you been hiding her? Because she's mute. This one sentence cleared up the whole situation. The reason why the Count married Aria's mother, a commoner, was because she was a siren. He wanted to acquire the power of the siren and pass it on to his bloodline. But the siren's daughter was mute, so she had little to no value. Even if she can't sing, she can become a great tribute to the duchy. Aria wasn't able to speak, so she could never reveal his dirty secrets. If you pay the proper amount and take this child in, the house of Cortez will never step foot inside the duchy ever again, he laughed. He was like a merchant explaining the value of a high-end product. The Count continued. One flaw is that she wasn't taught how to read and write, but she learned it at will. If you ever want to discipline her, you can just inflict a little pain on her arms. Aria listened to his words. Count Cortez actually tried his best to prove her value. Aria just told him to sell her to a great house, but she didn't expect him to do such a good job. I just hope the Valentines will accept me. Unfortunately, the butler was not impressed. The Count of Cortez, you came here without prior notice, made a fuss within the mansion, and insulted the Grand Duke's name. When have I ever insulted his grace? The reason we condoned your rudeness is because your father, Count Maestro Cortez, wrote the masterpiece of the century under the auspices of the Valentines. Count Cortez's face flushed. He had just been told that the reason he survived was only because of his father. The butler continued. The Valentines encourage art and respect the value of geniuses. So I suggest that you hold back before further staining the Cortez family name. In truth, what he meant was if you cross the line any further, then we will not hesitate to kick you out. The Count was very much ashamed and hurt, for it was the first time that he had ever been disgraced by someone of lower status. Aria, on the other hand, was impressed. The butler had already known who Count Cortez was. The Count had always been compared to his genius father. He had lived his life in his father's shadow, thus leading him to develop an inferiority complex. It was unusual for butlers to talk back to guests, But he is the butler of the devil, so Aria couldn't believe it to have gathered such detailed information on an intruder without prior notice. The butler was incredible. Aria glanced towards the butler, and their eyes met. "Oh, I see. Is the young miss unable to drink because of her mask?" Aria was puzzled. "There must be something that the Duke wore during the last banquet," he murmured. "I'll bring you another mask so you can finish your cocoa," he said kindly. He changed his attitude in an instant. Aria learned that the chocolate-smelling beverage was called cocoa. She felt embarrassed. The devilish butler, who seemed to be a vicious character, turned out to be surprisingly kind. Or at least only to her. Why, Aria wondered. Suddenly the hounds started barking. Woof woof. A heavy silence ensued, thicker than the uneasy tension in the atmosphere. Aria took advantage of this situation and wrote something on her card. "Please take me with you." The Count had a bad feeling, so he took Aria's cards. "Don't do anything foolish and stay calm," he threatened, clenching his teeth. Subsequently, he grabbed hold of her arm. The hounds became even more violent. They growled, baring their sharp teeth at the Count. The man grabbed the Count's wrists and twisted it to an unnatural angle. "All right, I'll take her in," the man said, taking off the black hood that covered half of his face. Aria stared at him in awe. The Grand Duke of Valentine. As expected, the man was Lloyd's father. His tall figure, his method of slaughter, his overwhelming power and murderous intent. Even with his hood on, Aria could easily recognize this man as Lloyd's father. The way they ruthlessly kill people, it's similar. She observed him intently. He looked just like Lloyd. Their hair was jet black and coiffed to perfection. Furthermore, they had the same shape of eyes. But they also had their own differences. Lloyd's hair was short, and it stopped right above his nape. On the other hand, his father had hair that flowed right up till his chest. They rested on his shoulders, straight yet soft, swaying like prairie grass in the breeze. The Grand Duke stared back at Aria, not avoiding her gaze. He had eyes like a pool of pure crimson blood. As Aria peered into his eyes, she felt as if he was searching deep into her very soul. But for the Grand Duke, her gaze was different. It was a curious gaze that he had never received except from his children. "You're a strange kid. Haven't you heard rumors of me feeding humans to my dogs? I even tried to kill you." Aria, of course, was prepared to die, so she nodded and grabbed the Grand Duke's cuff. His eyes widened and he was at a loss for words. He seemed genuinely surprised. Why, Aria was also confused. She didn't expect him to react that way. The Grand Duke glanced down at the little girl holding his sleeve. "I will deposit the down payment immediately. William, handle all the procedures," he beckoned the butler, ordering him as per usual. "Your Grace is very impulsive sometimes," the butler sighed, tired of the Grand Duke's spontaneous decisions. "Are you dissatisfied with my decision?" "Not at all. I am actually quite fond of the young lady here. One who is loved by animals could never be evil." "I'm not so sure about that," Aria thought. After that, William ordered the rest of the servants to prepare the money. As Count Cortez had affirmed previously, you are not to set foot in this mansion ever again. The butler will erase your memories and you will forget about today's events. The Grand Duke said in a cold tone, "If you were ever to break your promise, I will not hesitate to erase the Cortez family name from the face of this country. Think wisely, for your family is at stake." Despite his outrageous remarks to erase the genius Maestro Cortez from all history, no one doubted his words. For he was the infamous Grand Duke of Valentine. "Wait, I have one more condition." Count Cortez spoke, holding his twisted arm. "What more do you have to say?" The Grand Duke's tone was full of malice and hatred. He seemed offended by the Count, who dared to ask for more. The Count was terrified, but he still managed to muster his courage and spoke. "When Aria gives birth, you must give the child to me. That's all that I want. If a siren gives birth, there's a high possibility that the child would be a siren as well. To think that he'd still be greedy even though I brainwashed him." "I see that you're willing to become dog food," the Grand Duke hissed at the Count. "What, I'll let you disappear from the face of the earth if you'd like," he threatened. The beasts growled, baring their sharp fangs. Petrified, Count Cortez froze at his seat. He no longer had the audacity to ask for more ridiculous requests. The Grand Duke gestured for William to proceed with the payment procedure. "Escort the Count out." "What? Why is it not obvious? Your words might emotionally affect little Miss Aria here, and I refuse to be in the same room with the likes of you." "What, had you not spit out those last words, I would have been able to at least kick you out." "Nicely erase his memories, including the fact that he had a daughter." The Grand Duke ordered his knights. Aria didn't know that erasing the memories of a person was possible. Then the butler spoke. The Valentines are very skilled at erasing memories. You will only feel a slight tingling sensation on your skin. At the end of his words, a couple of knights dragged the count to a separate room. A moment later, a blood-curdling scream broke out. Slight sensation. Shall we go? Miss Williams said, still smiling. I ask for your understanding over the lack of preparations. The Grand Duke's decision was so sudden that we did not have the time to prepare. Young Miss will be staying here for a while until your room is fully furnished. The room was breathtaking and spacious. It was decorated with lavish furniture, and the decorations consisted of luxurious items and sculptures. The colors were like nothing else, vivid and bright. But above all else, the most distinguished part of the room was undeniably its art. The House of Valentine genuinely treasured art. Infamous and expensive artworks graced the room, and paintings that spoke of their profound history were displayed on the walls. The entire room resembled an art gallery, and appraiser Aria was in awe. Her impression of the Grand Duke changed immediately. She expected the room to be dark and gloomy. Rather, this is more beautiful than the Imperial Palace. Indeed, it was more gorgeous and vibrant than the Imperial Palace. Perhaps the rumor about the Valentines having authority over the Imperial family was true. Aria wondered. I thought it was just a baseless rumor. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. William entered the room with a rosy-cheeked middle-aged lady. Good evening, young miss. My name is Diana, and I am the head lady-in-waiting and caretaker of the Grand Duke's son. I will be serving you from now on. Diana spoke with smiling eyes. Her smile was as bright as the sun, blinding anyone who looked at her in the face. My eyes. Aria fiddled her fingers, trying to relax herself. Come to think of it, this was the first time someone had actually regarded Aria as who she was and not her identity as a siren. The Grand Duke's son, he must be caring for the madam right now. Madam, she must be Lloyd's mother. She was one of the few people who will soon be killed by the devil's curse. She will die soon. I hope you aren't too shocked by the Grand Duke's sudden decision, Diana said in a soothing tone. Seems like Lloyd won't welcome me upon my arrival. Well, who would welcome their contracted fiancé first of all? Diana said, eyeing Aria. Aria was very skinny and frail. Upon meeting her, she couldn't believe that she was 10 years old with that tiny body. Please write the types of dishes you prefer so that I can prepare them for you in the future. Baffled, Aria blinked her eyes. Then Diana dipped a quill to the ink and handed it over to Aria's slender fingers. Dishes I prefer. My favorite food. I don't have any preference. Aria had a lack of appetite. The only food she had ever eaten was cold pork porridge, and she would further lose her appetite whenever she was called a siren. She didn't even bother anymore. Eating was just a means to survive. My knowledge regarding food is limited. The only things she knew about was alcohol and drugs. She didn't want to know but couldn't help it. Aria often met nobles who held illegal parties. They were involved in prostitution, drug trafficking, and political corruption. The parties were dangerous and obscene. There was even a rumor that said the siren would only sing in corrupted places. It was tough for me. Ink smeared the white card. Aria took too long to think, so the ink droplets dripped to the floor. She had no choice but to write down whatever she could think of. Warm soup. Is this enough? She thought that it was all right as long as the soup did not smell and was served while still warm. Unfortunately, Diana was not satisfied. She had hoped that Aria would write more, so she glanced at her with a despondent face. She's disappointed. And so Aria pondered some more, and after a while she noted down another menu on her card. Bread and cheese. Is this enough? Aria thought. But contrary to her expectations, Diana's expression sank even more, so she wrote another one. Cocoa tastes like melon. Tastes like melon? Diana asked. Aria turned her head towards William, hoping he would explain it in her stead. He bit his lips with a subtle expression, neither smiling nor frowning. What's wrong? Aria gave the butler a few glances, but to no avail. She had no choice but to explain it in writing. Soft white clouds floating on top. I apologize. William turned around, holding back his laughter. Diana burst into laughter. As well seemed like she and William figured something out. Oh, haha, the taste is like melon. She nodded eagerly. Yes, I'll get it for you right away. Thank you. Is there anything else you need? Diana kept asking with an anticipating look, and Aria had no choice but to answer frankly, I don't know the names of any kind of dishes. Diana had a tearful countenance plastered on her face. Aria was embarrassed by the sudden change in the maid's facial expressions. Is she crying? Aria quickly thrust out another card. If you let me know, I'll memorize it right away. Shocked, Diana hugged her. The card slipped out of Aria's hand. She was bewildered. For the first time in her life, someone had actually embraced her. What a strange person. At that point, the arms squeezed a fraction tighter and Aria breathed slower, her body melting into Diana's as all her muscles relaxed, giving into her warmth. It was warm and cozy, just like that time she stroked the hound. Strange enough, she had no intention to push her away. Aria blinked. Young miss, she sniffled. It must have been so hard. You're in good hands now. Is she's trying to comfort me? Aria thought, puzzled. No one had ever regarded her as family. Everyone abused her, treating her like a worthless puppet. It's always like that ever since I was young. There were times where she'd cry a lot, but now even her tears had dried out. She felt nothing. Not even despair. She was detached. Aria wrapped an arm around her shoulders and buried her head into her chest. It's all right now. You didn't do anything wrong, Diana said while patting her head. Diana continued to console her. The maid of the devil's mansion emitted a strange aroma. The smell of sun-dried blankets. She smelled like the lingering scent of spring on a blanket that was dried underneath the sun. Oh my! Diana was surprised. She was startled because Aria had been standing beside the window since dawn. Did you have a nightmare? Aria shook her head. Diana looked her in the eyes and concluded that she in fact did. It's my fault, she wailed. I should have stayed with you a while longer. No, you're still a baby, but I was careless. You were scared, right? It rained all night too. No, Aria didn't usually sleep till morning. Aria tried to gain back her dignity by holding her no card over and over again, but Diana didn't listen. She kept treating her like a baby, and Aria couldn't help but blush in embarrassment. Baby, even if she did travel to the past, her conscience was certainly not that of a 10-year-old. My body may be small, but I'm definitely not a baby. Aria tried to explain that she was not a baby. Diana's lips rose into a grin, and she lightly stroked her head. Haha, aren't you still a baby? Aria was flustered. It's warm, Aria thought. Stroking someone's head was just a simple action, but it was surprisingly soothing. I guess this is why the hounds kept pestering the Grand Duke to pet them. Aria stared at Diana's hand. Her eyes brightened with each stroke. Do you mind if I stroke you from time to time? Diana asked. Aria held out a no card to her. But she kept glancing at Diana's hand, brimming with anticipation and hope, so the maid couldn't help but laugh at her innocence. Why were you leaning against the window? The flowers outside are beautiful. Aria pointed towards the window with a quill in her hand. The garden was adorned with garlands of the most vibrant blooms. I can see the flowers. I like them. Count Cortez used to trap her in the mansion's attic. So all she could do was gaze out the window and admire the beautiful scenery. It might seem boring and useless to others, but to Aria the flowers symbolized her hope to survive. I see, so the young miss fancies flowers, she smiled. Well, there are a lot of rare plants here in the mansion. Rare plants? Aria spent most of her life in confinement. So when she heard the phrase rare plants, she couldn't resist feeling curious. Aria peered at Diana with gleaming eyes. If you stare at me so imploringly, Diana exaggerated. I just stared at her with puppy dog eyes, but she looks as if she's just been attacked. It's raining right now, but would you like to get acquainted with the garden? Aria nodded. All right. We'll dress you up with the outfits you brought from home, Diana said as she ordered the maids to bring Aria's luggage. The house of Cortez sent the luggage. Which one of these cute dresses do you usually wear? All the dresses were actually brand new. The clothes Aria usually wore were rags. But I can't just tell her that. She hesitated for a moment but decided to answer honestly. I haven't worn any of these. My father bought them for me before we came here. Diana's expression darkened. Upon taking a closer look, these dresses are hideous. Didn't she just say they were cute? The fabric and design used are of poor quality. It's unacceptable. The Lady of Valentine should wear no such thing. Really? Diana made it seem as if the Count was a cheapskate who could only buy his daughter hand-me-down rags. Call the other maids. We'll be taking the young miss measurements, she instructed. Aren't we just going to the garden? Why do they have to take my measurements? Aria wondered if she'd even have the time to go outside. We'll finish this in an hour. Bring me a dress, a silk hat, and a lace umbrella. Maybe it is possible. Aria stood absent-mindedly, Everything went by so fast that she could not grasp the situation at hand. Then the maids gathered together and began to discuss the dress she would be wearing. One of the maids spoke in a solemn tone. "How about this dress? It's paired with a cloak, so I think it's fine for this weather, and she could wear these boots too." The outfits were stunning. They could even satirize those worn by the imperial family. Moreover, the detailed linings and the decorations were on a different level. Now I know why they mocked the Count's dresses. The difference between her dresses and the Valentine's was like heaven and earth. Aria was fascinated by the gorgeous and appealing dresses. But what she's most fond of was the sky blue umbrella with delicate white lace on its rims. "Wonderful, I got this tiny umbrella." She often imagined the sound of raindrops hitting an umbrella to calm down and relax herself. She couldn't wait to listen to it in actuality. Diana remembered something while glancing at Aria. "The mask you're wearing looked uncomfortable, so I made this in a hurry." Diana held out a mask. The mask was made with soft silk, and the inside was stuffed with cotton. Fluffy, but it had rabbit ears. What on earth? Aria glared at Diana in protest, but Diana just chuckled. "Rabbits are very friendly. This way, you won't be scared at night." She grinned. "Our baby won't have any more nightmares." "I am not a baby," Aria pouted. "Haha, of course you're not a baby. Young Miss is already grown up." "How silly of me to make such a mistake." Aria tensed up. Diana was the first person to have ever treated her so kindly. It tickles. Aria had butterflies in her stomach. Diana had shown her so much love and care. While she wasn't used to it, Aria was still grateful. Diana worked hard on the mask, so Aria had no choice but to accept it. "The Grand Duke too has never asked me to take off my mask. He didn't ask, nor did he forcibly take it away." Aria could have tricked him about being the Count's daughter, but he didn't doubt her even a single bit. "Maybe he's trying to test me." Treating someone with kindness is one way to assess someone's true nature. Aria needed to regain her senses. She had to prove herself as worthy and had to be as vigilant as possible. "All right, let's do this." Aria turned her back and changed into her new rabbit mask. Diana, as playful as she was, started poking her cheeks and spoke. "Haha, you've been hiding such a pretty appearance behind that mask." She wore that mask for only 10 seconds. Embarrassed, Aria puffed her cheeks and stepped back. "Stop that, I'll get diabetes from your sweetness." Diana gave a quirky laugh. She then handed Aria a mug. Yesterday Aria could not drink her cocoa because the mask covered her mouth. "It's a cold day, so drink this and warm up." She brought the cup to her lips and felt the cocoa's warmth inside her mouth. It was delicious, like nothing she'd ever had. Sweets usually made her feel nauseous. She had even vomited once after nibbling on a piece of chocolate. But this was different. It had a rich taste that enveloped her tongue before flowing down her throat and heating up her insides. "I don't feel queasy." Her heart pounded. The melon-like soft, white clouds that floated on the cocoa had a distinct taste and instantly melted in her mouth. Diana felt genuinely happy as she watched Aria enjoying the cocoa. "Does it suit your taste?" Aria thought she had no appetite since she always threw up her food, but she unexpectedly liked it. She wiped the whipped cream on her upper lip with the back of her hand. "Melon is delicious, but young Miss is far too adorable." "Cute me." Suddenly Diana raised her hand. "Is she going to stroke me again?" Aria froze like a nervous rabbit, but at the same time, she anticipated being stroked again. But before Diana's hand could reach her, knock knock, the door burst open and a concerned maid urgently stepped in. "Head maid, we have a problem. We're in trouble. The madam is in critical condition." Because of the sudden deterioration of the madam's health, all of the servants, including Diana, immediately headed to the Grand Duchess' aid. Every single one of them. "You can take care of yourself, right? Promise me you'll come back to your room after looking at the flowers." Diana worried. Aria nodded and gently pushed her back, as if telling her to just hurry to the Grand Duchess' room. A moment later the sky became dark, and the rain poured even harder. Aria stared at the mansion, listening to the rhythmic pitter-patter of the raindrops hitting her umbrella. She was quite worried. The Grand Duchess shouldn't die yet, but Aria thought that stopping her death could be the first step in avoiding the massacre of the Valentines. Diana had said that Lloyd was taking care of his mother. He loved his mother deeply, and he struggled with his loss more than anyone else, just like me. She unconsciously clutched her necklace and strolled back to the mansion, the top floor of the mansion. There was only one room with the lights on. The servants' shadows in the hallways could be seen throughout the story. That must be the Grand Duchess' bedroom. Aria found her location. It won't be easy to get permission to enter the bedroom. No matter how much the Grand Duke liked her, Aria was still an outsider. Furthermore, security was strict. The sound of footsteps are approaching over the wet grass, and as she turned to run away, she was already caught. "You, what are you doing here?" He had a deep voice. "I repeat, what are you doing sneaking around here like a rat?" He saw the shock plastered on Aria's face before she could even hide it. He knitted his eyebrows. Suddenly he drew out his sword and pressed it against Aria's neck. She raised her head and gazed at the wielder. "Reveal your intentions." He stood there, uniformed in cutting-edge attire which enhanced his dignified figure, clearly designed by great tailors. Droplets of water dampened his jet-black hair. His eyes were dark like two obsidian orbs, and his lethal gaze seemed to pierce her. Lloyd Cardenis Valentine. He was stunning like those characters in fantasy novels. His beauty was stupefying and surreal. Unlike any other, he was an Adonis among the other males. I knew he was beautiful. His eyes reminded her of smoky ashes rising from a passionate fire. They were intense, reflecting the flame burning deep within his heart. He wasn't this mad in the beginning. Aria did not like this situation. She was just actually hoping to meet someone who wouldn't be addicted to her singing. But strangely, I'm rather glad what he held was not a sword dripping in blood. It was a white, shiny sword mirroring the moonlight and fit for a noble. Aria's neck began to ache. The boy growled, "Spit it out unless you want your head rolling in the mud." What surprised you the most in this video? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon for updates.